Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion. It's not a straightforward review. It's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie. And I'd like to take a moment to thank my top patrons, and they are Chris Balga, Jeff Whitman, Philip Barker, and Michael Cross. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. And, if you do sign up for our Patreon, you do get bonus episodes, which have like a weekly roundup of what I'm watching, as well as interviews where we talk about various shows. Right now, we're talking about Marvel What If. So if that's up your alley, check us out. And if you like what you hear today, please subscribe and rate the show. It does help new listeners find us. Well, I've got a familiar voice on the podcast. I have Danny Hercules. Say hi, Danny.
Hi, Danny.
And you've been on the podcast a couple of times. We've talked about a couple movies. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit in case someone hasn't heard those yet?
Okay, I'm Danny Hercules. I am a writer. I've written many screenplays. Some of them have been optioned with major talent attached, but we never got them produced. I've also written a musical that was performed at the Hollywood Fringe Festival. I was the president and co-founder of San Diego Filmmakers, and I was on the board of directors at Scriptwriters Network in Los Angeles. And here's a little fun piece of trivia that's good for this week. I was a judge at a student film festival called Best Fest, and the winner of that festival, who was the best of the fest, every year that I was the judge, was a film student at San Diego State University named Destin Daniel Cretton, who currently has the #1 movie at the box office.
Wow, very cool.
You know
That's a
which one
great
I'm
fact.
talking about.
Yep, Shang-Chi.
Yep.
Yes, that's so cool. I love that.
Very exciting to watch his career grow from film school.
Yeah, that's a rare vantage point. That's really cool. Well, Danny, my guest always picks the movie. So what movie did you choose to talk about today?
Well, this is my third time on, and all my movies seem to have a theme.
Yeah, I noticed that.
All three of them have been original movies not based on existing IP. They all have one-word titles, and they were all later adapted to Broadway musicals. The first one was Xanadu, and then Elf, and now we're going to talk about Waitress.
Yes. Yeah, I noticed that. I was like, there's a musical aspect to all these. I was like, I see why he chose this. So, Waitress came out in 2007.
Right.
And this is actually my first time seeing it. I knew about the Broadway play more than I knew about the movie. Because whenever I would like buy I've bought tickets a couple of times to a couple of Broadway shows over the years, here in Dallas. But every time I did, Waitress would be like one of the options, So I saw the posters, but I didn't really know what it was about. So when I watched this, I was surprised that the movie, came first, like you said.
Yeah, it's great. We'll talk more about the musical later, I guess.
For sure.
So you didn't see the musical?
No, I haven't seen the musical. I've to be honest, I haven't seen that many musicals. I've seen like Les Mis and Jersey Boys and maybe a couple others, but I don't go often, so that's probably why. And so, like I said, I kept seeing the ads for it. So I was like, I knew it was fairly popular because it keeps circulating when I'm like looking through the tickets that I'm buying,
Okay. Yeah, it was really good. The songs were all written by Sarah Bareilles. And there's a cast album out there, but there's also a separate album with Sarah Bareilles doing all the songs called What's Inside. And so if you just want to hear the songs, I'm sure you can find it on Spotify.
Oh,
And
cool.
it's really worth listening to. It's a good musical. It's not the movie. The movie I think is better, but that's just me. So
Well, so talk a little bit about your history with this movie. Like, when did you first see it? What drew you to this film initially?
I'm pretty sure I remember seeing it at a matinee in Del Mar. I'm pretty sure I saw it as part of a curated series, like the Cinema Society of San Diego, I think it was. So I didn't necessarily pick it. I didn't say, "Gee, I got to see this movie about a waitress." I don't know that I would have chosen it. Don't know that I would have thought that I would have liked it, but of course, when I saw it, I remember just walking out of the theater very uplifted. It's a very hopeful movie. It's got a very it has some dark tones to it as well, but it's still
Hmm.
very hopeful. And I remember walking out just feeling I wish that there was a pie diner across the street that we could all go to and talk about the movie over a slice of pie. And I heard other people kind of saying the same thing. I got that vibe from the rest of the audience as well.
Yeah, it definitely makes you crave pie. I
Yeah.
can attest to that. And I love pie. I'm a pie over cake person. So I
Oh,
I
good.
think, I really liked that aspect of the movie. And I agree with you. Like, honestly, had you not chosen it, I don't know if I would have gone out of my way to see it. The title didn't necessarily grab
Yeah.
me, and so I was kind of not knowing what to expect. But I think as you watch it, it becomes more complicated and interesting as you go along. It's a really interesting way to tell this story. And before I go too much further, I do want to mention we will talk spoilers. So if you haven't seen this movie before, I recommend that you pause here, go watch it. And if you're still with us, here is the synopsis. So here's a synopsis for Waitress. Jenna works in a diner in a small southern town and is a genius at creating luscious desserts, but her marriage to an overbearing lout makes happiness impossible. When she discovers she's pregnant, she makes plans to skip town before her condition is obvious. However, she begins an affair with the new town doctor, who is the only one who knows her secret. And it gets more complicated from there. That, like, I read the description and then watched the movie, and I'm like, kind of a lot happens. And I wanted to mention, so Danny, you sent me, you actually wrote a book about this movie,
Yes.
right?
I wrote a series of ebooks on screenwriting. It's called Scriptipps, and what they are is, a lot of screenwriting books uh, talk about having a formula that every movie has to fit, and they'll say that every script must have this on page 12 and that on page 20, and I don't particularly subscribe to that theory. So what I set out to do was write a series of books where each one was going to analyze one script from scene by scene, kind of like this podcast. Well, we don't really go scene by scene, but and just talk about the what decisions the writer might have made, why they might have made them, why those choices work for that script, how they might work in your script, and so forth. And when I came up with the idea, I Waitress was the first one I picked, not because I thought anybody, I knew nobody had heard of it, but I picked it more, to do as a proof of concept. If I was going to spend time working on something like this that wasn't going to go anywhere, at least I'd pick something that I really liked and that I really enjoyed. So it'd be a fun 2 weeks for me. And what I found was, I didn't really think that this fit any kind of a formula. It did feel more like kind of a slice of life kind of a thing.
Hmm.
But as I analyzed it, I saw that it really does follow the Joseph Campbell hero's journey, monomyth structure, and in ways that I wouldn't had not expected.
Well, I will say the biggest. I started reading your book before we were recording, which I wish I had done this the opposite way, because I did some research and then I'm reading your book and it's right there. I could have just read your book first, so apologies for that.
No
But
problem.
you included a lot of really interesting facts that we're definitely going to cover. But one thing that I noticed about this movie is that I kind of had to digest it a little bit because
Mhm.
there's some things that happen that I think are very you mentioned in your book that this is around a time of talking about unwanted pregnancies on film, and I think that she's really exploring the writer director Adrienne Shelley is really exploring some complex situations that women might find themselves in. It's a very polarized topic to talk about unwanted pregnancies, obviously, especially right now, and I think that people have this perception that it's very cut and dry, you know? I think with Juno, which you mentioned, she's a teenager, and I think pretty much anybody can understand why that would be a bad situation to be pregnant in. But I think a woman that's married, uh, that's a little bit harder for people to understand if they have an unwanted pregnancy. And so I feel like the writer was trying to discuss, different situations that women might find themselves in and why, do they want to have a baby or not is more complicated. How it's not always, I don't want to have children. Maybe it's more about the timing, about the situation that they're in, about their financial status, all those things. And so I realized that at the end of watching it, that it was more complicated than I initially thought. Because, a part of me, this is me inserting my own thoughts into the movie, but I'm like, if she doesn't want to be in this situation, why can't she just exit it? But the movie does kind of explore some reasons why. And I think it does a good job of, sort of answering those questions. And I think in 2007, I think it's more even more taboo then than now to like I don't think there's a world where we would watch this movie where she would have had possibly an abortion,
Mhm.
because I think in 2007, studios would have been like, okay, that's an automatic, everyone will hate this movie. Whereas maybe now people would be more receptive to understanding the situation the character's in. And I think that's part of why she has the baby in the movie. And then obviously the other reason is because Adrienne Shelley was pregnant when she was writing this. And I think she was trying to put herself in other people's shoes, like, what are the different situations that women are in where maybe they don't want to be pregnant, and so not necessarily saying you don't want to have a baby, but you don't want to be in that situation at that time. Oh gosh, and my phone's ringing. Hold on just a second.
But good timing.
Yeah. Okay, there. But yeah, so I just thought that all that was really interesting, and when I was reading that part of your book, I was thinking, yeah, I think a lot of people were sort of exploring, different angles of that situation that people might not automatically think about.
Yeah, it's just a weird coincidence that that year three of these movies came out, and they all were. I think Knocked Up was also 20th Century Fox. So Knocked Up was
Yeah.
one of them. It was with Katherine Heigl and Seth Rogen, and that was just a drunken hookup that results in a pregnancy, but they don't really know each other that well.
Right, right, right.
And then you said Juno, which was Fox Searchlight, as was Waitress, and that whole different situation with being a teenager. And then you have this one, and yeah, Shelley, Adrienne Shelley, had said that she experienced a lot of fear about motherhood. I don't. She wasn't in an unhappy marriage. Her husband is actually has a cameo in the movie as an extra in the wedding scene, and so she wasn't she didn't have that unhappy marriage in her life, but she did have that dread and that fear. She wasn't looking forward to it at first, and she found out as she talked to other women who were mothers, and she found out that that was actually a common thing that nobody talked about. And so she thought, well, there's a good thing to explore in a movie because nobody. This is a real fear that a lot of women have. They don't just say, "This is great. I can't wait. I'm so blessed that I have this child in me." Not every woman thinks that way, and that's what she wanted to explore. And I guess she chose to do that with by putting her in this terrible, terrible situation with this horrible husband.
Yeah, because like in Juno, I can understand that one to general audiences being more popular because like I said, I think if it's a teen pregnancy, people automatically can understand why that person wouldn't want to be in that situation. But I think, to explore why someone who's married and older, able to have children fairly comfortably, why would they have fears and reservations? And so yeah, I think that was really this is a pretty smart way to explore that you know, now we're at a point where people are exploring stuff like that much further. But in 2007, it's kind of like people are dipping their toes into this idea, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, she has a very terrible husband. Well, I think we should get one of, I normally I share a bunch of fun facts, but there is one big fact about this
It's
movie
not
that
very
is
fun.
pretty
Yeah.
tragic. Yeah. And I think we should talk about it. And that's that, Adrienne Shelley was unfortunately murdered. And I don't think did she get to see the film completed?
It was locked. It had already been sent to Sundance and it had been accepted, but they hadn't notified the filmmakers yet. So she didn't get to know that it was going to Sundance.
Gosh, it's awful. I was so surprised when I read that I even started reading news articles about it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, basically, there's two different versions of the story I found. One of them, like the initial confession well, they thought it was a suicide. They found her hanging, I think, in her bathroom, but
Yes,
her
this was a,
husband,
it
or
was
go
an,
ahead.
she kept in a
Oh,
separate
and
apartment as an office.
Oh, that's right, that's
Yeah.
right. And her husband was like, "There's no way she was happy. That can't be what happened." And they found like a shoe print, and it turned out that a construction worker had done this. And I think initially the construction worker claimed that, they got in a fight, but then there's other versions. He had multiple confessions,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them was also just that he thought she was easy prey because she's very small. um and so it's fuzzy. It's not really sure what exactly the motive was, but it was like senseless and random,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And tragic. And yeah, and he staged it to make it look like a suicide.
Right. and
All
and
the
I think,
versions of the
yeah,
story include that.
right, exactly. And yeah, so that kind of looms over the film. We don't know, we lost somebody very talented, and we don't know what she would have gone on to do. I think this was her first film, right?
It was actually her third.
Oh,
She had
third.
starred
Okay.
in a lot of no-budget indie films with a guy named Hal Hartley, directed them,
Mm.
and then she made a couple of her own that were much, much, much lower budget than this.
Oh,
Um,
gotcha. Okay.
and then this was the next step up, and this was her first one that had gotten to Sundance. And it's certainly, I mean, you can see the movie. It's such a well-made movie that you can see this was the turning point in her career. She definitely would have had a lot more stories to tell, and we'll never
Yeah,
know.
yeah. I mean, for it to go on and become a musical
Hmm.
too, just that's pretty impressive. And yeah, exploring a lot of themes, and visual choices. I think in the movie too, like with every time the character's stressed, she thinks about a pie recipe, and they
Yes.
show the pie recipe. I thought that was brilliant. But just a lot of touches that you could see her like potentially going on to doing, like, maybe a big budgeted, Disney film or a family film or something like that. It just felt like there were seeds of that while watching this.
Yeah. Yeah. She. Everybody who worked on it said that she had this vision that was so specific. She knew, unlike most directors, she saw the whole movie in her head. And I mean, directing is being asked thousands of questions a day and having to come up with decisions on the spot. And she didn't really, they weren't decisions for her because she already saw the movie. She knew what she wanted. And a lot of the times the actors and other people were questioning her. I don't know how that's going to play, because it is such a unique balance of whimsy and darkness.
Mm-hmm.
And they were never
Yeah.
really sure how it was going to play, but she always knew exactly how it would cut together.
Yeah, I think she touches on some kind of, you know, serious things that the character is going through, and it almost like bringing light to certain situations that women find themselves in that are
Hmm.
more complicated than they seem on the surface. I think her choosing a character that, is sort of financially, um, I mean, manipulated by her
Hmm.
husband, and someone that, doesn't have what people would generally call in the corporate world like a higher skill set. How that's limiting her from leaving her situation that she's in. The hiding the pregnancy from her boss. Technically it's illegal to fire someone for being pregnant, but the movie kind of shows that yeah, it might be illegal, but it
It
happens, you
it
know?
happens. It happens, and it was a real fear for her. But it's also kind of funny how when she finally tells her boss, he's like, "Yeah, so what? I knew that. I don't care."
Yeah, it's sort of like I guess there's sort of like a small town vibe maybe that gave
Absolutely.
her that fear possibly, where
Oh.
somebody's, not doing something horrible seems like a act of compassion. To the rest of us it's like, well, obviously you would never fire a pregnant woman. Like that's like the bare minimum to not do that. But in her situation, and I do think that a lot of people in the service industry and at jobs like that do have fears like that,
Yeah.
being replaced or maybe your hours cut or whatever. So like I do think that's a legitimate fear, but yeah, they kind of play it in a more it's a serious topic, but it's not like this
Yeah, it
movie
was
isn't weighing you down. It's
it
it's
was so
it's touching
matter
on
of
those
fact that
things.
she expected that to happen, and then it did.
Mhm. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
kept thinking that it like in the movie it's like her life is almost portrayed like, oh, it's so crazy and out of control and she's having an affair. But I think you kind of summed it up really well when you're talking about it in the beginning. It's like there's all these external things that are happening to her that are putting her in these situations. She's not really at the wheel yet, and she
Yeah.
gets to be by the end of the movie. So I think that's also a very compassionate viewpoint, because I can't think of a lot of movies where women are having affairs and the female characters are portrayed as the hero. I thought
Yeah,
that was
that's
really interesting too, because that's pretty taboo as well.
absolutely. They talk about that a lot on the commentary that most people would say that's going to be an unlikable character. You can't do that. Most studios would say that. And again, Adrian just pulled that balancing act where you never really question it. You just go with her anyway. There's something that's likable about her anyway. Probably because we do feel a lot of sympathy for her because she's so stuck in her situation.
Yeah, I mean, in order for it to work, her husband has to be like frightening. I mean, I think in
Yes.
real life you could still have compassion or
Yeah.
kindness towards someone even if they weren't in that situation. But I recognize that for the purposes of the movie in 2007, that's why they had to do it that way. I think we're kind of getting to a point where we could explore characters like that in a more positive light now, but
Mhm.
certainly that's a challenge, to this day. It's like you can have your Donald Drapers who are, sleeping with tons of women, but you can't necessarily do that with the female characters. So
Right.
it's definitely interesting. I think it shows too, like when it is a woman writing and directing it, she does have like a different perspective on those characters in
Absolutely.
those situations. Yeah. And plus it's
Yeah.
Nathan Fillion and that's fun. We haven't even
Yeah.
talked about the cast, but it's a great cast
Well,
too.
let's not get away from the husband. The husband's played by Jeremy Sisto, and I think he's another example of that balancing act because
Mhm.
until he gets really mean, I mean, he's still an asshole at the beginning, but he's funny. He plays it really funny. There's a lot of laughs. If you saw it in the theater, that always got tons of laughs. And yet then there's that one spot. It starts when he stops her from leaving town for the pie contest. That's when
Mhm.
he slaps her. And
Right.
that's when it turns a corner. And I think there were some more comedic scenes that came after that they ended up having to cut because the audience at that point, test audiences, weren't really on his side. They didn't want to laugh with him anymore so much.
Right. And I read that like I think Carrie Russell said in the commentary that there were some darker scenes with him early on too that they cut or they
Hmm.
modified because it was like a little too dark. So like you're saying,
Right.
they kind of have that balancing act.
Yeah.
And also I think it's a good way to make us understand Earl, like how bad he is. I think there's a lot of hints in the beginning that add up to something in the end, like the fact that his wife doesn't have a car. He has this speech about how like he's like, I provide everything for you so you don't have to do these things, and she agrees. But really, it's all about control. I mean, if she doesn't have a car, she can't go anywhere.
Right.
Um, and if she doesn't earn her own money, like she has the waitressing money, but that's not a lot of money. And so he's keeping her financially tied to him as a way to control her. And I
Hmm.
think for about half the movie, you could almost be like, oh, I feel sorry for him. He's just being paranoid because of the way she's acting. But then, yeah, when it becomes physical, you're like, oh, okay, I'm seeing this for what it is now. the relationship has been bad for a very long time, and she's been sort of on eggshells skating around it. And it made me even question if her being pregnant was part of a weird plan to keep her there, because she mentions that she was drunk when it happened. I don't know. I was just like, this guy's really scary by
He's
then.
also a
And
little too
so
stupid to be thinking ahead like that.
true, true, true. That's very true. But it's like, whether he's 100% conscious of it or not, his actions are like preventing her from leaving him, but they're also causing her to hate him. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
so like I think it's easier to understand for the audience through that lens, like, okay, that's why this woman is like married, but this isn't the best timing, why she doesn't want to be there, why she wants to get out of it, why she can't just get up and walk away because she financially can't yet. I think they do a good job of kind of explaining all that.
Yeah, and I think he is the villain of the movie, and we can hate him and we do hate him, but at the same time, she does a good job trying to get us to understand him. It doesn't excuse the way he is, but we really see his insecurities come out. There's a time when well, I mean, all through the movie, he's telling her what to say verbatim. This is what I want you to say. He's controlling, of course, in a goofy way, but he also breaks down and cries after he finds the money. I mean, he's got some really strong insecurities.
Yeah, I think
And
he's got a lot of issues, and also I think he comes from a place of like, in his mind, this is how wives are supposed to be. This is what you're supposed to do, and here's all the things that I'm going to put in place to keep you there. And
yeah,
she's just like, it doesn't
maybe
work,
maybe
because ultimately
in the
she
South, maybe there's that more of that traditional family thing going on there.
Yeah, I got the sense that the whole town is kind of tied to those old-timey ideas, because it seems like they're all pretty miserable. We find out later, and it's like, y'all need to just move. If you
Yeah.
move out of here, you can do whatever you want. But yeah, I agree that the movie is compassionate and that there's another side to that story. Yeah, that insecurity comes from somewhere, I'm sure.
Mhm.
Um, but it also kind of proves that you can't make someone love you. You
Yeah.
can't, you can set all these things up, but ultimately his fears are realized because, I mean, he knows she's unhappy, I think he
Mhm.
knows before she knows.
Well, we haven't talked about Andy Griffith yet.
Oh yeah, and you had mentioned to me that you thought
Yes.
about this movie because we covered the Apple Dumpling Gang. So thank you for listening. And yeah, I used to watch that show a lot. In fact, I have an aunt who's named B, and we call her Aunt B.
Ah,
So, but yeah, this is a really sweet role, but kind of bittersweet knowing
yeah.
didn't he passed away not too long after this film.
Yeah, I think so. I don't remember how many years, but yeah, it wasn't too
Yeah.
long.
And he keeps saying in the movie, like, I'm gonna die soon, or
Yeah.
I'm like, oh no, it was making me sad. But I liked his character as this like cantankerous, diner guest.
Yeah, he's the owner of the diner. He's
Oh,
also
that's
kind
right,
of
he's the owner.
he's the mentor character. He's kind of like an Obi-Wan Kenobi to her. He's wise. He can tell things that she hasn't told. He guesses that she's pregnant. He guesses that she's having an affair. He knows these things. He's the one who tells her, you're not just a waitress. That's the only time the title is ever mentioned in the movie is when he says, "You're not a
Oh.
waitress. You're not a pie lady." Or I think he does call her pie lady, but you're not just a waitress, you're more than that. So he's giving her that parting message, trust the force, Luke, before he
Yeah.
dies.
And also he's kind of like a moral balance too, because he brings
Yes.
up his past about, he's like, hey, I've made some mistakes. I've had some crazy relationships, and my third wife, blah blah blah. So he's like, whereas some characters might be very judgmental, he's had kind of a rocky up and
Yeah.
down, and so he's like, I see the situation you're in, and he's compassionate towards her, and that really ends up benefiting her, obviously, in the end. But
Mhm.
yeah, I thought he played that character really well. I love when he's reading the horoscope to her, and she's like,
Yeah.
"It doesn't say that."
I love when he's describing the pie to her. Well, how much that her
Oh
pie
yeah,
means to him. That's so such a sweet scene.
yeah. Well, I don't think we've talked about Carrie Russell yet.
Oh, she's great.
Yeah, I obviously she's most famous for Felicity, right?
Right.
And I don't think I've seen her in a ton of stuff, if I'm honest.
She's
So I
also
really
was on
enjoyed
the
her.
she was
Oh, go
also on a
ahead.
show called The Americans, and I think that's actually
Oh,
eclipsed. Yeah,
yes. I
I think
haven't
that's
seen that show, but that is like a super popular show.
mhm.
But yeah, I really liked her in this movie. It definitely
Yeah,
gave me a
I
new appreciation for her.
yeah, when I first saw it, I didn't know that much about her because I never watched Felicity. I knew that she was
Me
in
neither.
it. I knew that there was some controversy about her haircut or something.
Oh, yeah, when she cut her hair really short. I never watched it, but I was young when that movie came out or that show came out, so I was aware a lot of my friends were watching it and stuff, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I knew it was popular, but I didn't know much about her until I saw this movie. And boy, it is it's tricky to take what's on paper on the page and turn it, just make that work when you have this thing that's so tonally unique. And
Mhm.
for her to have carried this whole movie, she's in almost every scene.
Yeah, you're right, and yeah, she's saying things and doing things that aren't necessarily endearing, and yet she's able to you have so much compassion for her character, and you totally get where she's coming from the whole
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, and I like that she has that superpower of being able to make these incredible pies, and she's aware of it, but she also doesn't give it that much as much credit as it deserves. She doesn't think of it as being a great gift.
Yeah, and also, like, her husband kind of puts it down too, like, he's
Yeah,
like, "They're okay, but you can't really you can't really rise above where you are now. I'm taking care of
yeah,
everything, you're good." And then, she kinda has this waitressing job, and they have that typical diner boss, it's like, kinda yelling at everybody all the time. I could
mm,
understand why in her position she's like, "This is it," you know?
mm,
But through the movie and through old Joe, she learns that her pies are really something special,
yeah,
and I like that idea, because I think it's true that, pie making doesn't necessarily sound like a career, but it is, there's a lot of people that do open bakeries, and making something delicious that people wanna eat
yeah.
is important, and so I
I mean,
like
she
that for
had a
her.
sense that if she entered the contest, she would win. So
Yeah, that's
she
true.
knows that's a skill, but she didn't think it was all that special. And
Yeah.
and we know differently from looking at those pies.
Yes, they look delicious. Again, it helps that I really like pies.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, go ahead.
Then there's Nathan Fillion. He plays the gynecologist who she has an affair with. And what's really interesting about that is um, how he is. She's attracted to him because he's complimenting her. He's listening to her. He does everything the exact opposite of what her husband does. She's just not, she says, I'm not used to saying things and having them matter to people because she'll, her husband's in his own little world. Uh, Nathan Fillion gives her this really nice compliment, and then in the next scene her husband is his idea of a compliment is your boobies are getting bigger.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's like actually pretty much everyone in her life, like I said, like her boss and stuff. They treat her, they think of her as the waitress, and I think this new doctor that's from like a bigger city and has never met her, he's seeing her with like fresh eyes. And you're right, I think the whole reason for the affair too is really just anybody that would treat her better than Earl, she's going to be attracted to. And I feel like they do a good job even with Dr. Jim Pomatter?
Pomander, yeah.
Um, they do a good job with his character where I feel like he falls for her because she's in so much danger, and he's like I don't know, there's, like, a weird connection of, like, him being a doctor and being, like, a lifesaver and caring for people. It's like he gets
Yeah,
swept up in that with her, and at one point in the movie, she even says, like, "You can't save me from this."
right,
But you can tell he, like, wants to, like, almost like if she wasn't in that situation, I don't know that they would have gotten together, but it's like
right.
it's kind of funny that he's white knighting so much that that happens, you
Well,
know?
there's that same scene is she talks about how the baby's a parasite and it makes her weak and tired all the time. And he looks at her and says, "No, no, no, you don't understand. You're beautiful because you have the," and that's his profession. He is a OBGYN.
Yeah.
He obviously must believe that, the miracle of life and all that. And so he's being very genuine when he is attracted to that about her. You're absolutely right. That's a major part of their attraction.
Yeah, yeah. And I think too, like, through this affair, she realizes, okay, like, there is a possibility of life without Earl, and it could
Mhm.
be better.
Yeah.
And I think she kind of learns that through him, and she's definitely a mess, and clearly he's making a mess of his own situation as well.
Yes.
As he keeps mentioning in the movie, he's like, "This is really inappropriate, and I shouldn't be doing this." Um, but it's like ultimately for her life to get better and move forward, they don't end up together, which I really like that too, because I was like, that tornado of a relationship is not going to work out.
It's
So,
interesting, yeah, so the first time he has her come down to the office before it's open, for something that she didn't really need to come down there for, and
right.
she questions him on that, she calls him out on it, and their conversation, it's kind of awkward because he has that weird, awkward delivery of all his lines, which is just that in itself just makes you laugh, but if you take that away, the situation is a little creepy, you know?
It is. It's inappropriate. Like, "Oh, let's go to my
Absolutely.
office before it opens." And, like, the fact that he's a gynecologist just makes it worse.
Yeah.
And it's like, in real life, I would be like, "How many times has this doctor done this?" But I think in the context of the movie, they make him likable enough and kind enough to
Yes,
where you're like, you don't assume that he's doing this all the time. It's like this weird situation. And
right.
it's also funny, like, Carrie Russell's character is getting herself into all kinds of situations throughout the movie that are complicated. It just seems to get worse and worse and worse until it gets to the very end.
Mhm. Yeah, that scene we were talking about where they're he comes over to learn how to bake a pie. That's where some of the things we were just talking about are in that scene. That's my absolute favorite scene in the movie, and especially because of the song that she sings. She tells him about a song that her mother taught her when she was teaching her how to bake pies, and that's a song
Mm.
that Adrian wrote. She wrote the lyrics to it, and then they
Oh,
brought in a composer. And I always wished, I don't know why this didn't get any Oscar recognition. I have a hunch that it was because Fox Searchlight, which is really good at Oscar campaigns, they had two unwanted pregnancy movies. Juno was getting more buzz. Waitress
yeah.
didn't have a writer director to go out and help them with the campaign. So I think that's why they dropped it. If they had done one category, I wish they would have at least tried to get her a song nomination for that one song.
Yeah, and it also ties in. I didn't even think about this till you mentioned it, because it's about her mother and she's pregnant with a daughter.
Hmm.
There's a really big tie there as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Well, yeah,
yeah,
she
it's
even
just
ends
very
up
sweet.
naming the pie diner at the end after her daughter,
Yeah, so
Louise.
there's like this strong mother-daughter bond with her mother and pie making, and then her having a daughter, and then yeah, it's like that. It all comes full circle. I think you're really right about the story elements being very tight in a non-traditional way, but they all kind of connect to each other.
Hmm. And that the baby at the end is actually Adrian's baby.
Oh,
So
wow,
that's
gosh,
really sad. Every time I see
it
that
is
scene,
sad.
it's such a beautiful shot of Carrie walking away with her, but it is also very heartbreaking.
Yeah, wow, gone too soon.
Yeah.
uh, well, what are some of your other favorite scenes that stick out to you in the movie?
Hmm. Uh, I do like there are other flights of fancy where we go inside her mind in clever ways besides the pies. There's the one where she's her first visit to the gynecologist's office where she sees the other pregnant women, and then we see them without their clothes on. That
Yes,
she's
I thought that was
realizing,
so
oh my
funny.
god, this is what my body's going to look like because this is in the period where she's still dreading the whole pregnancy.
Right, right, right. I'm glad you brought that up. I did think that was really funny.
Yeah.
Um, Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, there are other scenes like that where we lots of clever different ways to get inside her head. There's when she sees an unruly child at the diner,
Yes.
and they slow it down and they play Wagner over it, you know, and they repeat that gag later on, just before her water breaks with the
I'm not
silly
gonna lie,
string.
that's pretty much what goes through my head in those situations. I'm always like, "Oh, no." And I think that's so it's such a sweet way of looking at that. I think that's so cool that, like I said, that she was going through some of those emotions and realizing, "Oh, like, we kind of in society act like being a mother is just like this natural thing that everybody just automatically feels great about," but she's kinda showing this more human side to her where she's having doubts and fears, and it's being
Mhm.
explored in some really fun and funny ways. What are your thoughts on uh I can't remember the name of the other waitress, but the waitress that has that admirer that she ends up like marrying.
Yeah. Well, that actually was Adrienne Shelley.
Oh, okay, that's Adrienne Shelly.
So that's the
I
writer
was confused if it
director.
was her or the other girl. Oh, okay. Well,
She plays
she's really
Dawn.
adorable.
Well, in general, there's two other waitresses, and they both have their own subplots, and those subplots exist to give the main character alternate viewpoints of relationships.
True.
She's
Yeah, good
she's in
point.
this terrible marriage. She's contemplating or going through with having an affair, even though it's really against her morals. And then Becky is having an affair. She finds out, and
Mhm.
so she's lecturing her and saying this is wrong, even though she's going through it too.
Which I
Um,
feel like is that's really real. You
yes,
know?
exactly.
Because it's, like, so much easier to see the flaws in someone else's situation than it is your own, for
Yeah.
sure.
And then with Dawn, it's still the same thing. It's now Dawn is finding love with kind of an undesirable guy. At first, she doesn't like him, but then he grows on her, and we do get an indication that at some point in Kerry Russell's character, what's Jenna's early life with Earl, that there was some love there, that there, she didn't
Yeah.
just marry the guy who just because he was controlling. I mean, at some point early
No,
on in
he
their
was probably a
relationship.
Romeo and then
Yeah, and
flipped a switch
we get
once
a
he
couple
had
of
her.
hints. There's a couple of lines dropped about how they had a good relationship at the beginning,
Mhm.
and she's kind of stuck with him, and she sees that Dawn might be stuck with this guy. What did you think of the guy that she ends up marrying? That's his name is Ogie, and he
Well, I
writes
thought the scenes
spontaneous
were
poetry.
funny. In real life, I would be like, "That's inappropriate to hit on someone at their job and make them uncomfortable until you date them." I don't think that's a good idea, just my opinion. But I think the actor played the character really well, and it was funny. And at least, unlike Earl, he was not cruel or anything. But
Right.
I think, like you said, the other two waitresses, one of them having an affair, her husband is, I think, old and
Hmm.
sick. So
Senile,
it's
I think
like,
she says.
yeah,
We never see him.
we never see him. Yeah, yeah. I feel like it's maybe a May December romance situation where, and so that's going on with her, and then this thing going on with Dawn, and yeah, she's kind of like, wow, a bunch of people aren't happy like me. Like,
Yeah,
I think for a while she was sort of keeping everything a secret, hiding everything about her life because I think she had a perception that everybody else had their shit together and they don't. And so I think by seeing that, she's able to be like, okay, well, it's actually okay that I'm unhappy and my life's a mess. I mean, I want to fix it. I don't want to keep doing this, but it kind of enables her to see that, and,
yeah.
and like you said, to see different relationships.
I was curious about your thoughts about Ogie because he's my least favorite character in the movie, and partly for
Yeah.
why you said, because he is relentlessly stalking her and being inappropriate,
Yeah.
and also I think part of it might be. Remember, I said that Jenna is in every scene of almost every scene of the movie. The only scene
Hmm.
she's not in is when he comes to the restaurant and sits down at the table with Dawn. And I think maybe
Oh.
in my writer's mind, I was thinking, you know what? I'm more interested in Jenna's story. All these subplots are supposed to be about Jenna. And I wanted to see her in that scene, and maybe I was missing her. But the ironic thing is, in the musical, they actually expanded his role,
What?
and he steals the show.
That's very strange. I tried not to be too judgy about the character just because I can go off on tangents, but
Yeah,
yeah, I agree with you. I think this is sort of like an outdated portrayal of someone who's like, quote unquote, not going to take no for an answer. And I think
right.
in a grander sense, in
I mean, but they
society, I
tried to
think that's
make
a
it
bad thing
goofy.
to perpetuate. But in this movie, it's goofy. So it's
Yes,
like you can kind of overlook it.
right.
It's more of like he's just annoying, and also there are some relationships where someone's like, I thought that person was annoying at first, and it was really sort of like a, underlying attraction that they don't recognize yet or something. So maybe that's what's going on there. I
Yeah,
don't know. But
yeah.
yeah,
But
to expand his role to where he's like a main character seems
I mean, not just a
superfluous.
main
I don't
character.
know.
He really steals the show. People, he has a couple of show-stopping numbers, and he gets the most
How
applause.
weird.
And I think
Maybe
the cast.
that
I
writer of
saw
that one was like, "Oh, that's me. I'm gonna
it could
insert
also be the
myself."
cast. when I saw it in Los Angeles, and I think the actor who played Ogie was the only cast member that I saw it with who was in the original Broadway cast. So he had
Oh,
maybe had been doing
okay.
it longer, maybe it had been tailored for him.
Okay. Yeah, that's surprising to hear, but like you said, sometimes when they adapt it for something else, it changes a lot.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But I can understand like seeing this first, I would be like, that's the guy I don't like. Why would I want to see more of that guy? That's funny.
Yeah. Oh, I know what I can tell you. Here's an interesting story. So, when I had the idea to write that book about Waitress, I have this little networking group that I meet with every 2 weeks, and we talk about what projects we're working on and see if anybody can help us with anything. And so I told them about it because I wanted some of them to read the first draft and give me notes. And when I mentioned that I was doing it on Waitress, one of the girls in the group who I'd known for a while said, "Get out of here. My husband was a cinematographer on that." And I did not know that up until
Wow.
that point.
Oh, that's a really cool connection.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It is
So
shot really well.
it absolutely is. And I'm not just saying this because I know him, but it really, the lighting does add so much to it. It is, she was going for kind of a fairy tale quality, and it has that warm light the whole time through. And you can see the differences when we're in her head and when we're not. And, you know,
Mhm.
when she's, there's a scene where she's in the kitchen of the diner alone, kind of lost in her thoughts making the pies, and just the warmth from the light is just so amazing. And the colors of the pies are also, I mean, they had a pie specialist flown in to make those technicolor pies at the end, but it
Oh,
was
really?
amazingly shot. Yeah.
Well, and also, like, I like the color palette of, like, of the whole movie, but,
Mhm.
they're in these sort of traditional diner outfits, and then, when she opens up the diner, it's all these, like, primary colors, and she's
Absolutely,
got
yeah.
that the
Very
yellow.
heightened. Yes, very technicolor, and it's just, it's very dreamlike, you
Yeah,
know.
and it's kind of, I mean, they have Andy Griffith right there, right? It kinda
Hmm.
reminds you of that era, but sort of like a more modern take on, the woman that is the waitress and a pie maker, like, is the main character now and is, like, sort of
Hmm.
she's got this big dream and it's being realized, and, like, I don't know, I just liked how she kind of tied sort of those traditional elements with a more, like, I guess, under a more modern lens for that particular character. So I don't know. I just liked all those elements together.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and also on the ending, this just struck me when I was rewatching it the other day, just for this. At the end, when she has the baby, and she turns to Earl and confronts him for the last time, and all
Yeah.
she says is, if I'm through with you, if you come near me again, I'm going to flatten you. And that got cheers at Sundance, I've heard. Uh, and I thought, another movie would probably want to make that more of a decisive victory for her. I mean, because at any point in her marriage, she could have turned around and said to him, "I'm through with you, leave me alone," and he would have slapped her. And why he
Yeah.
doesn't here is, it's not about her winning. It's not really about her escaping from Earl. It's about her learning that, finding her inner strength to to voice her own, stand up for her own independence. And it doesn't
Yeah.
matter whether or not he listens to her. In fact, she deliberately, Adrian Shelley deliberately has him go out of focus at that point. He is still arguing, but with Nathan Fillion, and they both go out of focus because that's not important to her anymore.
That's really true. They could have made this movie centered on sort of like a domestic violence situation, because in some ways, I mean, that is kind of what's happening. He's controlling
Hmm.
her, he's abusive, but also I think it's almost like she had to be in the most extreme fearful situation specifically with him to realize she could just leave.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I think she couldn't imagine, she was already daydreaming about leaving him, but she
Hmm.
couldn't really do it. Then she gets pregnant and she's like, well, now things are worse. And then when she has the baby, she's like, "You know what? I'm just gonna blow up my life and start over.
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm done dealing with all this. That's what I'm gonna do." And it's almost like she has to be in all these terrible situations where, like, she's pregnant when
Oh,
she didn't want to be, and then she has an affair, and, like, she's blowing up her life, and she
that's
realizes it doesn't really matter. Like, I can start over. and all
That
it's
is
almost like
the
all her
essence.
fears had to happen for her to do
Well,
that.
that's the essence of the hero's journey. The hero
Yeah.
thinks that they're going to find one way out going to the pie contest. I mean, the hero's already in a world that's broken in some way, and they're trying
Mhm.
to find a solution. They think it's going to be the pie contest, or they think it's going to be having an affair will bring her happiness. And she needs to go. This is any hero's journey story. They need to go on the wrong path to learn these things as they go, and then they pick up tools along the way so that they recognize it. And she is steadfast against the baby from the first frame of the movie. She said, "I don't want this baby." I think the first pie is, "I don't want Earl's baby pie." You know, the first pie she invents on in the movie. And all the way through the end, even when she has the baby, there's this incredible shot where she turns away and the camera
Yeah.
holds on her face for a real long time. And you hear the nurse in the background talking to her and saying, "Can you hear me? Are you all right?" Boy, do I know what that feels like. You know, if you've ever been in a situation where you've passed out or, anything like that, that, that captured that feeling.
Hmm.
Such an
Yeah.
amazing shot. And that's
Yeah.
just before she turns to Earl and confronts him that way.
Yeah, because in reality, like, it's not that she doesn't wanna have children, she just didn't want to have them with Earl. She
Right.
didn't want there to be one more thing that keeps her in this really bad situation, I
She didn't
think.
want that life. It wasn't the
Yeah.
baby, but she wrongly thought that the baby was then going to keep her there. And then she
Yeah,
realized,
and
no, he doesn't
luckily
have to, or she doesn't
right, she
have
was like, "I'm taking me and this baby out of here."
to.
Which I'm sure is better for her and the baby,
and
but
and of
yeah.
course she makes that decision before she knows that Andy Griffith has left for that money.
Yeah, yeah, because otherwise it
Right.
would it would undercut her a little bit, so,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and he left her that money because he was like, "This guy's awful, and your pies are delicious, and, like, you need to get out of here." So, he made the right choice.
Yep.
Well, was there anything else, any scenes we missed or anything in your notes that we haven't covered yet?
Um, I think we covered a lot. Did you have favorite scenes? What's your
Let's
favorite
see.
pie?
My favorite pie, oh gosh. Um, I don't know if it's my favorite pie, but I liked the look of the pie that she brings to her doctor when she thinks it's still the other doctor.
Uh, with the
When
first
she
one,
yeah, the very first pie is very colorful, it
it's
looked
the
like Lucky
marshmallow.
Charms.
It's the
Yeah.
marshmallow mermaid pie.
Yes, that looked delicious.
Yes. You know,
I was like, "I don't know what's in that, but, I would eat it."
I'm glad you brought that up. That was something else I wanted to talk about. How well this movie does these reversals, these setups and callbacks. So the first time she goes to see who she thinks is going to be her regular doctor, not Dr. Mueller, not knowing that she's not there anymore, she brings Dr. Mueller's favorite pie, the marshmallow mermaid pie, a girly, fun pie, and then it's this dude who she's never seen before, and she doesn't want to give him the pie. Then later on, when she's in an affair with him, and she's bringing him naughty pumpkin pie, and she gets there and finds out he's not there that day. He had to go to out of town for a funeral, and now she's got this naughty pumpkin pie, and her old doctor, Dr. Mueller, is there, and she's got it. So it's a complete reversal of the first time.
Yeah, and also, I didn't think about this, but she tells her doctor, like, "No, you're the doctor that delivered me," or she was like,
Mhm.
"That was a doctor that delivered me, the doctor I had my whole life." And it seems to be this theme of, like, her being afraid to sort of, like, break out of old patterns because that's the way it's always been.
Wow,
And this
that's a
is, like,
great
the
point.
very start of her realizing, like, "I don't have to do things the same way forever just because I've always done them that way."
I hadn't thought about that. That's a great point.
Yeah, I like that callback.
And then there was the
Let's
the running gag with call me if you have any questions or concerns, and then later on she throws that right back in his face.
Yes, it's so good. Yeah, I liked that. Like I mentioned before, I liked all the scenes with Andy Griffith sort of being not the male version of her, but just somebody that, like you said, a mentor in Obi-Wan,
Mhm.
somebody that can really understand her and see her, that's not a romantic interest. Because although it's great that Nathan Fillion is so kind to her and all that stuff, she needs like one more character that she's not in a relationship with that she can turn to. And when he leaves her that money, it's not a romantic connection. It's like she kind of had to get away from stuff like that to sort
Yeah.
of blossom. Because she ends up, raising that baby on her own. She didn't need
Mhm.
somebody to do that for
Yeah.
her. She could do that herself. So it's kind of cool too. Um, yeah, I think those are kind of like my favorite parts.
Cool.
Well, I guess this brings me to my last couple of questions for you then. Why did you choose to write a book specific? You kind of mentioned this already, why you picked this as one of the movies to write notes, screenwriting notes about. But if you could summarize it, why did you do that? Why have you seen it so many times? Why does it stick so much in your memory?
It's like you said, it is just something that kind of stuck with me. I saw it the one time, I enjoyed it enough to buy the DVD, and then as I can watched it, it put me in a good mood, and I would watch it again, and I would watch it again, and then once I really studied it to write that book, I fell more in love with it. So
Yeah, I think one really appealing thing about this story is it's kind of fun seeing a character all their worst fears happen, and then
mhm,
once they happen, they deal with them and then they move on. It's
yeah,
like there's hope, even if you're in a bad situation and a lot of things are being thrown at you, like this character learns they're strong enough to handle all those obstacles. And it's kind of done in a sort of lighthearted way, and like you said, it's very warm and it kind of wraps up in a
yeah,
very positive light.
it's a real feel good movie, even though it has all that darkness in it. You come away just feeling uplifted. I wish, I kind of I moved to a rural town partly because movies, not just that movie, but a lot of movies like that set in rural towns, they appeal to me. I've only lived in big cities until last year,
Oh,
and
wow.
I've recently moved to a small town because they look so nice in the movies. They look so peaceful.
Yeah, yeah, very true. I had a experience this year where, we bought a house recently, so we moved we were kind of already in the suburbs, but now we're really in the suburbs. And then I rewatched the movie The Burbs, and I was
Yeah.
like, whoa, this is like this is my life now. Like understood that movie so much more this time. So
Yeah.
there is something to that. How do you pitch this movie to someone that hasn't seen it before?
It's a movie that's going to make you want to eat some pie afterwards.
That's accurate. Yeah, I have to admit when I first watched the movie, I watched it under the lens of like decisions I would make, and they're
Right.
not the same ones that the character would make because I'm not the same person as the character. I like that after I kind of digested it and thought a lot about it, I like the way it explores a different situation, a different choice, and how this character handles all these obstacles in their own way and finds their own, truth and resolution to all of them.
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool, and I think that it's a good film that explores a lot of themes that are kind of like you said, a little dark, but done in a really good way.
Well, I think what you said about the decisions that were made that wouldn't be the ones that you would make is a lot of why we like these hero's journey types of stories, is because
Yeah.
we get to experience the wrong path vicariously through a harmless movie, and then we learn from that along with the character and see how they can emerge transformed and victorious at the end with
Yeah.
what they've learned.
And I do want to stress it's not me judging her as a
No,
character.
of
I
course
think
not.
just, I wouldn't do that, but it's not because I think she's a bad person or anything. I hope
Yeah,
it
I
doesn't seem
think
like
one of the
that.
actors said that on some of the extras on the DVD. They said, Adrian didn't gets away with writing characters who do bad things because she doesn't write them judgmentally.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's something in
And
my
yeah,
writing. I
and
always
and
try
to be
not to
honest,
judge my
I'm not sure
characters.
I even think the things she does are bad, but
Right.
um I think she makes her situation more complicated. Um and there are better ways to go about it, but yeah, I never get the sense that she's like a
Yeah.
bad person or
Yeah.
anything. And I think that's really compassionate and a good way to view that character.
Well,
Yeah.
she has this line at one point where she's talking about selling her baby, and she tells Dawn.
I'm
She
sure
says,
every parent's thought of that at least once. Let's be
and she
honest.
says to Dawn, Dawn says, "Oh, don't even talk like that." And she says, "Look, I don't want. I respect this baby's right to live, and I'll eat right and everything, but I'm not jumping for joy about having it, and that doesn't make me a bad person." And I think that was Adrian's theme.
Yeah. I think that was hard. I mean, it's still hard for people to wrap their mind around,
Hmm.
but I think especially in 2007, I feel like maybe a lot of these movies came out around that time because that was sort of in the
Yeah.
in the pop culture consciousness, like exploring these concepts that were previously thought of as like taboo, you know,
Mhm.
and looking at them from different angles and different situations that people might find themselves in and why they might be thinking about these things. And it's, I mean, since then it's evolved way more than that, you know, to where we have movies that couldn't have been made in 2007. So it's interesting to see, you know, that progression for sure. And
Right.
I appreciated it. I thought it was good.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you
Um,
liked it. I'm glad I could turn somebody onto it.
yes, thank you. And you know, when I put it like in the Facebook group, I saw people hitting like, and so clearly they've seen this
Oh,
movie or
oh,
at least the
good.
musical.
I
So
must have missed
yeah,
that post.
yeah. And on Twitter, well, I did it a little while ago. I didn't do it
Okay.
right when I started the movie because I frequently do that where I start watching it and then I'm like, oh no, and I forgot to post about it, so I posted it
Oh, I thought you were
recently.
going to say you start watching it and then you change your mind and cancel the episode.
No, 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 that hasn't happened yet, thankfully. But sometimes I'll watch it and then a couple days later I'm like, I never posted about it. Oops. So
Okay.
sometimes I have to be like, now watching when I've already seen it. um, but yeah, so thank you so much for coming on, Danny. I really appreciate it. I appreciated the, you know, the research that you did, the time that you put into this, and you know, showing me a movie that I had never seen and ended up really liking.
Well, thank you for having me back.
Of course. Oh, do you need to do any plugs?
Sure, I can
Yeah,
talk
go
about
ahead.
Scriptipps.
Yeah, go for it.
I don't do a lot of social media, but I am on Twitter as Scriptipps, Scriptipps. Um, and I do tweet out a screenwriting tip every day. And also, if you're interested in the book about Waitress or any of the other Scriptipps books that I wrote, I think there are only about 12 of them. Go to scriptipps.com. It's Scriptipps.com. And you can find the links to buy them. They're only available on the Kindle and as EPUB books on Google Play.
Great. Well, thank you so much and hope to have you back soon.
Thank you.